Welcome to a special mailbag episode of the It's a Mimic podcast, where I, Adam, am sitting down with one of our Patreon subscribers, Andri, who has generously become one of our patrons of Platinum Great Worm tier. This means that he's able to sit down and record an episode with us, and he decided that today we're going to be discussing Icelandic Elves. Now, I know nothing about Icelandic Elves, so I am very, very excited about this. We've been trying to do this for like 5 months, right? You were waiting on a specific book for a while?
Yeah, I was waiting on a specific book. I then had to read the fucking book, try to translate Icelandic phrases over to English. And let me tell you, as a full-time guide, that is my full-time job as well. And it is annoying. Because Icelandic is a way older language than English. So some words just don't have a translation.
That's fair and interesting. And so what, as you were explaining to me before we hit record on this, you've got the book, all your notes are in the book, and all your notes are in Icelandic. So this is going to be, what'd you say, a clusterfuck?
A clusterfuck. And yes. Quite frankly, like I said, what more do you want from a Fae episode than an absolute clusterfuck? I'm going to try my best to make it as cohesive as possible.
All right, that's awesome. So every time that you dump some lore on me, pause every once in a while. Maybe we can talk about how we can apply that to D&D.
Yes, because, absolutely.
I think that's the mission statement for this episode, but...
Absolutely. You stop me if you have questions, anything. If it's D&D, just don't worry about it.
All right. So before we get into it, Icelandic elves are not Lord of the Rings elves, right?
No. This is a perfect start-off point. So we, of course, all think of elves in D&D as Lord of the Rings elves. We think of Elrond, Legolas, Haldir, Galadriel. You know, we think that is the immediate thought. And to be fair, that is my thought for D&D elves specifically. When I think of elves, I think of my Icelandic elves, which come in various shapes and sizes. We're talking in English and in D&D, anything from a pixie and a fairy to a high elf in the Feywild, Archfey.
Yeah.
Those are Icelandic elves. That is what I call an elf. I don't have multiple names for this. I just have elf. And funnily enough, the word elf, E-L-F, is Nordic or Icelandic in origin. You just decided to change it like fuckwits. And traditionally, when we talk about elves in Iceland, we are speaking mostly about pixies, like little things with some wings, but there is a lot more than that. For example, this is just a general of what elves are in Iceland, and then we'll get into what the fuck they do later. Then we have something called the hidden folk. I don't know if you've heard of that, Adam, at all, the hidden folk?
You specifically have mentioned the hidden folk in the past, and I've been like, yes. That sounds that it could be like sprites hiding among the flowers or fucking Slender Man or anything in between.
So it's a lot more in between. The hidden folk are almost indistinguishable from normal humans. The only way to tell the difference, and this is where my lack of English vocabulary kicks in, between your nose and lip, there is a bridge. I don't know what the fuck that's called, but do you know what I'm talking about, Adam?
I think it's called the philtrum.
The philtrum.
And I don't know why I know that, but...
you know what? We all, for a pub quiz, it's good to know. The hidden folk don't have that. So the hidden folk, almost like changelings, are just in and around the normal folk, but you can't really tell unless you know this little thing.
When you say they're in and around, they're not like replacing and walking as people. They're hiding around corners, I'm assuming.
No. They're not replacing people. They are just amongst the people, often. Here in Iceland, elves and the hidden folk live in lava fields. The hidden folk will often come out of the lava fields to mingle with the normal humans and not necessarily play tricks. But if you are not kind to a hidden folk, you will learn to regret it, because they are still elves and they will, in short words, curse your entire bloodline.
Every once in a while on the podcast, we talk about just in a passing, we say Fae are fucking dangerous. You don't want to fuck with Fae, and everybody kind of like knows it, but also I don't think most people know why.
Right? Yes, absolutely. Here in Iceland, we know why.
Yes,
trust me. I am, yes, only 22 years old. I am born in this century and this millennia. Like I was not born 100 years ago when this was a wide belief. Because I don't know if people on the internet, some people might have heard it. There's this old survey that 90% of Icelandic people believe in elves. That's just fucking wrong. All of us believe. No, I'm kidding.
Well, okay, based on your own personal experience, keeping in mind this is very subjective, how many people legitimately believe in elves?
Legitimately believe, I'd say my great grandparents.
Okay.
I'd say the oldest generation believes.
But okay, take it a step further though. Look, if I'm out for lunch with Dave and Terry and Kyle and Megan and whatnot, and we're sitting there talking about ghosts, they're all going to sit there and be like, no, not a thing. Except for Megan, it's like, no, ghosts are real. So I'm going to get like a 20% ghosts are real subjectively. But I also know that at 2 a.m, if the cupboards slowly start opening up on their own, every single one of those other guys going to be like, well, shit, maybe ghosts, right? Like there's
absolutely. And
is it the same way for elves in Iceland?
Very, very similarly so. Like I said, the oldest generation 100% believe. Like I grew up on this. Even my grandma and my mother used to tell me stories just as a precautionary tale of not going into the lava fields because that's where the elves fucking live. You don't go there.
Well, also, don't go into lava fields, Andri. What the fuck are you doing?
No, not not active ones. The fucking old ones that are cold. Because I should have made this distinction.
you honestly needed to clarify that because every 4 months you're posing in the Discord with the last volcano eruption. You're like, yeah, I can see it from my apartment. I'm like, Jesus, Andri.
My bad. No, in like cooled down lava fields. The active ones we know that you're not supposed to go to, but you don't go into the cool down ones because of both elves, and it is just generally dangerous. You don't know what's hiding. You don't know how deep a ravine or whatever is. But elves do, like I said, live in the lava fields, and people who believe, wow, I really lost the plot. Sorry. Okay. Whoa, cut. Hold on. Okay. Action. There aren't a lot of people who would believe that are my age. However, Icelandic people are, I'm not gonna say honest enough or brave enough. We're maybe a little more skeptical than the rest of the Western world when it comes to this. Because I would say that 80% of people in Iceland would say maybe they exist.
Sure, yeah. It's like how people feel about angels in like across America.
Yeah.
A lot of people say yes, a lot of people say no, but if you push them, a lot of them be like, well, I mean, I heard a story, or how else would you explain this, right? Like it's
exactly
a shrug.
And
yeah,
precisely, and that's kind of how we big words here, how we explain that to ourselves. For example, a very very simple thing to put into just context. You ever put your keys down somewhere and then you just can't find them?
Yes.
So here in Iceland, we would say, the elves are playing a trick on you. Because both that's just the culture, and maybe they were. Like, you can't. Here's the dangerous thing about believing in elves in Iceland, and this is soon enough. This will come to the end of the Icelandic Elven rant properly.
So hold on a second. I'm gonna pause you for a second here. I'm gonna pause the rant. The idea of like, so this is it a colloquialism essentially? The idea of, you set your keys down and you're like, oh, the elves are messing with you. Is it the same thing as like how young people today, they misremember something and then they'll make some offhand comment about I must have shifted realities, and then they move the fuck on, right? Like it's
in a way, the biggest scientific theory on this phenomenon is that 60% of Iceland has undiagnosed ADHD, and very, very obviously a symptom of ADHD is just forgetting where you play stuff. But that also goes pretty deeper with neurodivergency and the Fae. For example, the legend of the changeling came because the Fae in wherever the hell would change children out because their child wasn't normal enough. So now you have a fey child raised by humans.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be autism or ADHD. And here in Iceland, I'd say there was a little bit of that, but not maybe as demonized as it was in, for example, Old England or the old times in Europe. But the reason why here in Iceland there was many of us that said maybe, and it's a pretty simple reason. It's because we don't like to take the chance of being wrong or inflict the wrath. Because there's a very important thing in Iceland. You cannot acknowledge an elf if you see it. The moment you acknowledge it, you are now it. Like, it owns you.
So hold on, but we also have to be polite to them. So like you can, you can acknowledge the interaction, right? If you bump into someone, you go, oh, I'm sorry. But if you say, hey, you're an elf, you're in trouble.
Yes,
okay,
precisely.
All right, so it's not like you have to completely ignore their existence. You just have to treat them like they're a regular person.
And that's specifically the hidden folk.
The hidden folk.
And that is absolutely a thing you should do. With elves here in Iceland are, I say it like I'm talking about elves different anywhere else in the world, are tricksters because of where they actually originate from. Back in the ye old days of Iceland, 1200 years ago, close almost at our settlement, most of the population was actually Irish women because the Vikings took a pit stop, let's call it, on the way.
Mm-hmm.
And our elves are actually closer to Gaelic elves.
I was going to say, there's a lot of parallels with like Celtic folklore, right?
And absolutely, but that's only here in Iceland. Celtic and Nordic cultures mixed here.
Mm-hmm.
Trolls, like we see in Lord of the Rings, that wants to turn to stone.
Yeah,
that's Nordic and Norwegian specifically. The elves that are here in Iceland are Irish, but we still have the trolls. Here in Iceland, this mixed.
Okay.
These two worlds overlapped, which I could talk about Icelandic folklore for literal hours, but I'll try to stick to the point with the elves.
Sorry, just out of curiosity, which one do you prefer? If you had to split it down the middle and say, okay, there's the Nordic influence, the Celtic influence, which one are you personally drawn to more? Which one inspires you the most?
Oh, that is a great question. Honestly, I'd have to say the Nordic draws me more because that is the most prevalent. Unfortunately, very similarly to how Irish people throughout history have been treated, that Irishness was kind of pushed down in Iceland. So it is we are Nordic.
Well, I mean, the Vikings were in control, right? So their legends, their stories, their culture would have been more prominent than the Irish or Celtic, women that were raided, right?
Absolutely, but yet still this Celtic elven influence still lives 1200 years later.
Yes.
And it's almost died out entirely in Ireland.
That's because they don't have lava flows there, Andri.
Very true, very true. But if there's also a lot of disagreements on the origin of elves in folklore. And the oldest one and the most simplest one would, of course, just to say they come from Alfheim in Nordic mythology.
Yeah.
And that is written down 900 years ago in the Eddas. I don't know if you've heard of those. Those are if you need like proper like Nordic mythology influence, absolutely try to pick up the Eddas because that is where every single piece of Norse mythology comes from.
Can you spell that for me?
EDDA apostrophe S, Eddas.
Cool.
It is written by an Icelandic man who I could also talk about for hours because he was the biggest menace to society ever. And he had to write about everything, all explanation about elves and Nordic mythology with a Christian tint to it because the church was being pissy. And he writes that elves that we traditionally think of, high elves, pixies and such, they are from Alfheim and they live above the ground. They see the light. Whereas the hidden folk, or huldufolk in Icelandic, are more descended of the dark elves, who would live underground in Alfheim. And then later on in the 19th century, you get a man who writes how it is created from Adam and Eve, which is...
interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
I was not expecting that. That came out of the left field for me.
Trust me, when I read this book, same. But this is actually, I'm reading this again, and this is quite hilarious. The story goes that Eve had put Adam in wow, what is the this is where I'm really testing my English knowledge. Where the oh my god, Adam, what is that called when you a restraining order? I found it. Thank you.
There you go. Glad I can help. Yep.
So apparently Eve had put Adam on a restraining order. I don't know how the fuck that works back then, but whatever. After Cain and Abel went into some fuckery, and this is hilarious. And Adam, as in Adam and Eve, had to relieve himself. Let's call it.
Oh yeah.
And his baby batter, sure, went into the earth, and that's where elves came from.
Wow, what a wild origin story.
Yeah, I know, right? We here in Iceland, we pride ourselves in originality.
Holy crap. So I don't suggest using that as an origin for elves in D&D. I mean, I'm not like you do you. I'm not going to kink shame, but like I don't recommend it. It might be a session 0 conversation to have.
That's another origin, and then another simpler one was that Eve was not the first woman that God created, and the children that Adam had with that woman came, the elves came from her, and trolls. Sorry, and trolls would also come from her. That is absolutely wild.
Yeah.
And this is probably just going to get wilder from here, because this is actually, well, quite funny and different to most folklore, I'd say, because with the elves, they of course have some sort of hierarchy, as most things in the world do. There's always some sort of hierarchy. However, in elven lore, it is a matriarchy. The women rule, much like how they do in the drow.
Yeah.
But not in the same like slave sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The women just rule. They have more say, so on and so forth. And very often, when a female elf would cross over to the mortal plane, because they would live in a almost Feywild, they would just live in like a different world. When they would come over, and men would be what men were back in those days, more dominant, and try to, do something. The elf would be like, fuck you, you are now my slave forever, snaps her finger, and he is now thrust into the, let's call it Feywild.
So is this both elves and the hidden folk?
No, the hidden folk, this is specifically elves. Hidden folk they are most prominently just in the lava fields and then come out to play.
Right, and elves are actually like in and among the people.
In a way, yes, but on a different plane. This is such a, now that I'm trying to explain it properly, this is such a difficult thing to explain to someone who has not grown up with this.
Sure, yeah. I've got I've got some questions. First of all,
yes,
we are dealing with like not another plane, but another like there's a place beyond the Earth, right?
Yes,
where the Fae reside, right? And as I understand, lava flows tend to be not necessarily a gateway specifically or a portal, but kind of where they would come through, like a soft spot almost.
Yes.
And then the hidden folk stay there, and they are different than elves. Do they have a relationship at all?
Not one that I could see specifically in the book. But since they are both technically types of elves, they are complacent with each other. Like these are not like high elves and drow. They're not opposed, right? Yeah, they're just there.
And neither is particularly good or evil. They're just, they follow their own rules with that blue-orange mentality, and they can seem chaotic. The hidden folk tend to stay away from people, but the elves proper like to infiltrate societies and mingle for periods of time. And if you cross them, they can be fickle, and it can be very, very, very sudden when the punishment, the consequences come down on you. Sudden and I don't want to say violent, but extreme, right?
Yes, extreme is definitely the word I would use. There are a few stories of how this has come to play. One, I'll try to keep them as quick and to the point. There is a story about a girl who stayed stayed home as the rest of the family went to church on a Sunday, and she was just there keeping everything under control. Then an elven queen came to visit, and the elven queen tried to promise her a better life, tried to talk to her, just anything. And as the little girl was taught, she did not speak back. She ignored her the entire time. For a few hours, the elven queen then left, and the girl was safe. There's another similar story. If you go to some specific hills in or around Iceland, or in your world, if you want to take this as inspiration, the elves can start to offer you gifts of great riches, gold, items, gems, whatever. And at the stroke of every hour, they will bring more, give you better stuff, more gold.
I feel like this is a fey trap.
Absolutely. If you accept the first one, you've been tricked. You are now owned by them. Let's say you manage to live out the night. You resist all temptation, and the elves give up. You then get everything they've offered, and they lost. Now, this story is both it's a two-part lesson here in Iceland. It's be patient, good things will come, and don't trust the fucking elves, because you really shouldn't. Because as I have told you, crossing elves is a bad idea. Just acknowledging one is going to get you a lifetime of slavery, or they will take your first child, which is a very classic Fae thing to do, just throughout the world. And quite frankly, it varies from anything of you can never use your pinky again to slavery. There have been stories of them, well, turning people into whales, because why not? And quite frankly, elves are the single most terrifying thing you could come across here in Iceland, if you so believe or are so unfortunate to cross them.
So hold on, I gotta go back a second. Turning people into whales?
Yeah.
Is polymorphing people a common thing in elven lore?
I wouldn't say it's an everyday occurrence, but there are definitely stories about them doing it. And I mean, I just came across the story again as I was flipping through my notes here. If I find it again, I thought I'd come back here, page. This is not unknown to us as D&D players, since, fairies or pixies have polymorph, or had. I don't know if they still do.
I don't think so. I think they're mostly, they can change themselves, but they don't change others, right?
Yes, which fits, because they're not changing themselves into whales in Icelandic mythology. Or Icelandic folklore.
Yeah, sorry, I say that, but I haven't looked at the 5e or the 5.5 materials yet. Yeah. Right, I'm going off of older editions, but I don't know if they can still do any sort of shape changing. I think they're mostly just like nature-y at this point. They're more akin to like fairies from like Greek mythology than like Celtic fae, right?
The ones in D&D?
Yeah.
Well, I'd say so. I feel like it is an extremely odd mix of them both, because if we just take the example of trolls in D&D, they are sensitive to the sunlight, but not in the way that trolls that I would think of are. Like if a troll goes into the sunlight, it turns to stone. It doesn't just not regen or whatever the fuck it was. D&D is just it is a high fantasy, or usually a high fantasy setting, so it's of course just taking everything from itself. I think we talked about this once before. When you think of a dragon, you think of the European Western dragon, four legs and 2 wings. I think of a worm.
Yeah, I bet you do.
And that's why excuse me. That's why I kind of do enjoy D&D, because it has this odd mix of both. For example, the Feywild, the little that we have, which is the little what we have in 5e at least, is kind of reminiscent of the other side in Icelandic folklore, because the other side is a lot of great castles. There are, it's more colorful, more bountiful, and that always kind of stuck with me when I either went to the Feywild as a player or listened to people, like in Critical Role or in whatever. When they went to the Feywild, it was always explained in like it was more saturated, I think is the word a lot of people use. And yeah, it is probably the sixth time I've probably said this. It is unfortunate that more isn't taken, like more inspiration isn't taken from granted a very small country's folklore.
It's very clear to me. Sorry, I'm just going to pause you right now.
Yeah,
on
of course.
that point. It's very clear to me that Gygax and Arneson and the rest of them, like the OG D&D creators, were very focused on Greek as opposed to Roman or even like African or Asian or Nordic. Yes. Right. And you can tell when they move away from that, because while we do have like the Cyclops and whatnot, they very clearly said we should have giants. Where do we go? Let's go Norse. And they read that chapter. And it hasn't really changed a whole bunch since, right?
Yeah.
D&D was crafted by a bunch of guys, 50 years ago now, which had very specific ideas about even like you could tell that they come from a Christian background, at least if maybe they weren't churchgoers, but they were probably raised around Christianity because of the angels versus devils, and devils and demons are consistently at war, and the nature of the nine hells and the trickster devil versus the chaotic possession of demons. Like you can tell kind of where their influences were, and that is why I love these conversations you and I are having right now. But also I met up with Robert last month. I happened to be in DC. I understand you're going to meet him in a couple of months. Yeah. And he handed off a couple of folklore books that I won during the D&D trivia on the Discord, on the Patreon Discord, right? So he handed off those books to me, and I chose Aztec myths and West Africa tales, and I'm like, these are going to be so weird and strange to my Eurocentric Western world players, right? Like, and it's a lot of the media that we consume still. I mean, there was a Netflix show called Chaos, which was like a modern retelling of a bunch of Greek myths that was with Jeff Goldblum. It's really fun, really good. Yeah, it got canceled, but the first season was a great little story. When was the last time we had the Roman pantheon, right, running around, or the Egyptian pantheon get the spotlight, let alone all of like the Hawaiian pantheon? Like there are so many other like myths and stories, legends, religions and cultures and whatnot that we're not pulling from. So that's why, like, you're sitting here saying, yeah, it's too bad they didn't pull from this tiny little island over here. And I'm like, yeah, but it really works in my benefit that they didn't, because now I can steal shit and be really cool. So.
No, absolutely. I when I bought the book in Icelandic, it wasn't until a week later I saw they had it in English. And do you know how much that would have fucking helped me right now?
Hey, what's the book called?
Do you want the Icelandic title?
No, because I might buy it in English. There's a translation.
I think it's just Elves. I might have to Google it myself and send it to you. It is just simply called Elves. Let me see if I can find it.
Is there a specific author we should be looking up for this too? Because I'm sure that there'll be people that'll be interested in this book too.
Yeah, as if you can pronounce this. Hjörleifur Hjartarson.
Gesundheit. Does this guy have a name?
Hjörleifur Hjartarson. That is his name. You're asking for an Icelandic name, my guy.
Yeah, I'm going to get you to send it to me through Discord or something, so that I can put this book and his name in the show notes.
Yes, I will try my best to find the English translation. I could have sworn they had one. The bastards. Well, never mind that. I'll figure that out. Anyway, No, I mean that last time I can think about any other like culture or mythology getting any sort of spotlight is in American Gods, and that isn't like a super big part of it.
No, and it was a modern retelling of
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
So okay, spoiler alert for anybody that has not seen and wants to see Watcher in the Woods. In 3, 2, 1. Spoiler one. It's bad and littered with plot holes, and I do not recommend it as a movie. But what's really cool is that it was like the redeeming factor here. This is one of those situations like the movies Lady in the Water or Mama,
mhm,
which are these are folklore tales that are promoted as horror movies, right?
yeah,
And I really, really love them because they're like or I love the genre. It's not always done well, and Watches in the Woods is not. And the big twist is ancient fae fucking with people, and they're dangerous and scary, and they'll hunt you down. And the last the final act of that movie fits our conversations about elves walking among people and that kind of shit pretty well. It's fairly interesting to see. Like
mhm,
someone clearly read a book, right?
yeah,
And it is, and you would never expect that going into the movie. So it's like a sudden tonal shift that's very, very weird. It's like everyone complains about the movie Hancock being two different stories. One is the superhero, and the other is them being gods. I'm just spoiling every fucking movie now, but uh, but if you look at it from the perspective of on the rewatch, hey, these are gods that don't know they're gods. Yes, this is how it manifests. The movie holds up a little bit better, right? And
mhm,
there are a bunch of films like that where they're trying to deal with translating old folklore into modern day, contrivances and how it would impact regular people. And there's still a thirst for that. There's still an audience for it. I mean, that's why people are still going crazy for the SCP shit online,
oh
or
yeah.
Slenderman, or like, which is wild that I've dropped that twice now in this episode. But because the movie was ass. Let me just say again, the movie was ass. But
Well, yeah, you just play the video game and you have a better experience.
um like that's why people are so ready for the supernatural, or like, but like ancient unknowable supernatural. I'm not talking Five Nights at Freddy's, right? Like that's not what I mean. I'm talking about when the old world and the old myths, the ability to create a prophecy or legend or something, is in and among our own daily lives. People still like that quite a bit. I assume, like, is elf media lore, or like, are they making new stuff in Iceland that people like, that kids, that young people are
uh,
still interested in, or like is it
no, like our Elven influence is extremely just old and from the settlers and then stories from them. The only modern Elven influence I think people in Iceland get is of course Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and this might be a stretch. Do you know what a moomin is? A
I'm sorry, say
moomin
that.
elf?
No,
Moomin.
no.
No, don't worry. I didn't think so. It's somebody might know what it is, but it's basically just Finnish elves. It's there is no modern Icelandic elven influence. It's all like don't go near this rock. This is an elven church. Don't go near the lava field. The elves are living there. Like, and then just stories we hear. There is very unfortunately not much more than that. It is a dying thing, I'd say, in Iceland, at least with the modern and the newer generations.
Yeah, that tends to happen. We're seeing the end of some like American, or North American, I should say, not American, North American folklore as well. Like we're seeing the end of it. There are
Yeah.
fewer and fewer UFO crazy people out there, and I say crazy people with the utmost love, because for a good solid chunk of my teens, I was very much going, yeah, but we should watch the skies because right? So like there is the shrinking belief in Bigfoot, right? Like as modern
Yeah.
technology moves forward and as people become more focused on the fucking phone in their hand and not what's going on outside their windows, not to sound like a crotchety old bastard, but like we're seeing the idea of these creatures kind of disappear unless you're in like the closer to the wilderness. When you get into like the Mothman, right, or the weird shit that happens in the Appalachian Mountains, right, or
Yeah.
like the remote versions. I'm sure that if you go to a small village in the middle of nowhere in Iceland, the belief in elves will skyrocket, right? Like there will be a lot more of that.
Absolutely. You don't even need to go. I mean, you don't need to go far.
The
I
nearest
mean,
nursing
just
home.
uh, pretty much. No, but also just like a small farmstead. Like their belief would probably be more like close, like not close-minded, like closer to it. Like they think about it a lot more. But I mean, and it is such a it's such an odd thing to unfortunately try to explain, because I mentioned before, I work as a tour guide, so my job is literally explaining some of this lore, but I haven't had to do this in depth. And it did occur to me to maybe I should ask my grandparents a little bit more about this, but they would just give me the same bullshit answer as they probably always have. Don't put your nose where it's not supposed to be. And I have a strong feeling that's why it is unfortunately dying. However, even then, true Icelandic culture and Icelandic elves and such is never going to fully die. And do you want to know why, Adam?
Because they're real and they're using you as a marionette right now to record this episode.
Fuck, he knows too much, guys. No, because it is all over Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, to a degree, right? Like
to a degree. For example, every single one of the dwarves in The Hobbit is named after dwarves in Nordic and Icelandic mythology.
Yes, the naming conventions for sure are inspired by Nordic culture.
Yep. I mean, the trolls are there as well. That's Nordic. I mean, hell, I'll take it a step further. I don't. You might not even know this. You know, the language that the elves speak is built on Icelandic.
Is it really? That makes a
It
lot
is.
of sense now that you say that. If you would push me to try to like figure out what language it would have been, I probably would have landed somewhere between like Swedish and Welsh, just because of the letters that are used, right? But you know, not Welsh because Elvish has vowels, but but definitely that corner of the world. So
yeah, no, Tolkien spent a lot of time here, so he got a lot of like just also like elven influence. Like it's not nearly as prominent, but I mean, hell, look at if we're gonna really go there, the hidden people are incredibly similar to hobbits, not in the same way, but they are traditionally little, look identical almost to humans, but there's something a little off. They live in the ground. I mean, you have most of the recipe there, and then you just be like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to make them more cozy, though, because I want this to be a children's story when he originally wrote The Hobbit, of course.
And you can draw the parallels to halflings, because halflings, which of course are just D&D hobbits because copyright reasons, but halflings are weirdly private too. Like that's the fucking lore about them is you can't find one of their settlements. They don't hide it. It's just difficult to find because, right? And if you do stumble upon one, it'll be great. You will be welcomed, but you follow the rules, right?
Exactly.
They have their own secret language that is not even like available for other species to learn, right? And they don't speak it in front of others for exactly that reason, because they're very, very private. And as much as they're about like home and happy and down to earth rural kind of vibe to them, which again kind of lines up with people like telling stories about the hidden folk in more, you know, like less populated areas, right? Like you can clearly draw parallels. I'm not going to say one was directly inspired by the other. I'm not sure that people were doing research on Icelandic myth to write about halflings for the first time.
No, probably not.
But I bet Tolkien was doing a little bit of that.
Absolutely.
And if not doing the research to write what a hobbit is, he was at least exposed to it and inspired by it, and said, hey, you know what? I could tell a little story, and it's going to have a person that is kind of like this thing that I've heard about in the past, right? And then, extrapolated from there. When it came to language and whatnot, I know that he was very in depth. He was a linguist, right? So that was a big deal. So that probably did have research. But for us hacks that are ripping him off for the last 70, 80 years or whatever to build our own fantasy stories, all the way from fucking Gary Gygax down to the brand new DM who is just starting now. We don't necessarily realize that people talk about Tolkien's influence on the genre, and he's like one of the grandfathers of fantasy and whatnot. But fantasy is what it is because of his influence, and he was influenced by other things. And so there are, like, very clearly, and you don't realize this until you start playing D&D for a long time, you start looking around at other, like, where else can I grab stories? The monster manual is boring now. But there are very clearly other ways to think about shit. Like the fact that some ghosts and demons are the same thing in some East Asian cultures, right? There are entire pantheons of gods that are ripe for the plucking from like Hindu cultures, right? And like there's just there's so much other stuff out there that he did not pull from because you had a spotlight on these things in his life, right? And so I mean, I'm not shocking anybody by saying writers get inspired by things they know, but it's interesting that if you had asked me, I would have said, generally speaking, he was inspired by European folklore, probably a lot of British and whatnot, and maybe some Irish. Icelandic would not have occurred to me, but it's very clear now that you pointed out.
That is totally fair. Like Iceland, I say unfortunately, is not a first thought when it comes to anyone. We are a rock in the middle of the fucking North Atlantic.
Hey, you were the bad guys in Mighty Ducks too, and that's important.
You know what? And I'm proud of it. They didn't even try to speak Icelandic in that movie.
They just cast like big blonde boys. Said good enough. That's Iceland.
Pretty fucking much. And this is a side rant. You know how that guy, that their coach was apparently a dentist or whatever the fuck?
Sure.
Yeah. Funny thing, many years later, our like football coach, our like European football, the true football, I'm going to die on this hill. He was a dentist, so the prophecy came true, just not in hockey.
Is hockey big in Iceland?
I'd say it's probably in the top 5 sports here in Iceland.
Okay.
It's not like, I mean, because we are European, football or soccer is forever number 1. And then, and this is hilarious, because of American influence in the Second War, basketball is huge here in Iceland.
Fucking wild.
Basketball is huge. Then we have handball. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah, actually, we did units of it in school here in Canada.
Yeah, so. Handball is huge here. We live, some of us live, breathe, and die handball. Then we have wrestling, then hockey.
What's your number 1?
It's my number 1.
Football.
Funnily enough, no, wrestling. I'm a pretty big and stocky guy, and
I'm sorry, and just to be clear, we're talking like Olympic, not WWE.
No. We're talking Icelandic. Icelandic wrestling is way different.
What's that? Is that just getting drunk in a pub and wrestling in the snow?
Shut up. No, Icelandic wrestling is a little different. You're both wearing special kind of leather belts, and you both get a grip of each other's belt, and you just have to throw one of you on its back. It's very difficult to explain now that I'm saying it out loud. But
yeah, but I mean, it's like sumo wrestling is very different than wrestling.
yeah, like it is its own
yeah.
genre, but it is very like it's not WWE. It's way similar to just Olympic wrestling. But from Icelandic wrestling, we go a lot of us, me included, go into MMA.
Okay.
So like fighting sports is also huge here. But I'd say those are the big five. But
anyways, that's not elves. Let's
yeah.
let's turn around. I've got a bunch of notes, a bunch of thoughts to wrap this up. To
lay them on me.
To turn us around back to D&D. But before we get into that, I want to ask, how much of the content that you prepped did we go through?
I'd say probably 70% of it. So not too bad. To be fair, I didn't have all the time in the world to prep because I had to do it between work and just life.
Sure, of course, yeah.
I could probably get more if I had like a weekend to prep this entire thing.
Do you want to revisit this again when we do the next episode?
I will keep you updated on it because I don't know if I have a relatively free weekend before, like, because work is let me tell you, work is chaotic right now.
Oh, I mean, like in 3 months, Andri. Like,
yeah, no, absolutely. I will keep you updated on it. I'll try to find like 2 days for me to sit down properly.
Well, let's try to revisit this sometime before the end of the year. We've got a few more episodes to do. Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We may do something closer to D&D in the meantime, but
yes.
All right. So here's some notes that I have. All right.
Absolutely.
First and foremost, kind of the things that we talked about were, first of all, isolation breeds superstition and religious commitment, right? Like,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, Iceland was isolated for almost 1,200 years.
Yes,
and like that breeds superstition, and also why this book is difficult to translate over from, because it's all in Icelandic. The language has barely changed in 1,200 years.
Yeah, but even in Iceland, when you go to the more rural areas, the superstition and religion ramps up, right? Like,
yeah, I wouldn't say up to 200%. I'd say it's more prevalent.
Sure, you're more likely to get one of those colloquial, well, looks like the elves are messing with you kind of comments than you would.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So and I want to apply that to Dungeons and Dragons. When you are in Metropolis, when you're in Waterdeep, right, or the city of Greyhawk or Sharn, you're not going to have the superstitions. Like, the religions will still be there, but they're going to be more organized. It's not going to be the quiet little like customs and whatnot that you do in like the outskirts of civilized lands, right? Of settled regions. So that's the first thing. The further out you go, the more likely you are to get to like a roadside tavern in the middle of nowhere, or a small little village, 300 kilometers down the river, right? Then like when you go to these places, you're more likely to have people doing weird little, I don't even want to say rituals, but just little things that they do to make their life feel a little bit safer from the surrounding areas. And of course, it's Dungeons and Dragons, so sometimes that shit should be true, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to go like too far. I mean, dream catchers are still very much a thing in the modern world, and that is like an extreme, I wouldn't call it an extreme superstition, but that's definitely a superstition.
No, but I mean, but I do want to point out that they're very, very different, because when you end up in a city, then it's full of plastic beads and it's been mass produced, and you buy it off of the rack with 900 other ones, but I want the purple one. But you go way up into the north where of like British Columbia, where I live, and you get into some of the smaller communities in there that make their own dream catchers. They are very different, and the vibe is very different. And so there will be things like, oh yeah, we went to the church of whatever D&D god in the city, and it was really cool and ornate and blah blah blah, but then we found the weird little shrine in the backwoods when there's no one around to the same god, and the same iconography is there, but it feels older, it feels more ancient, and feels more personal, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
So that was the first note. I've got about 8 of these, maybe
good.
Maybe 10.
Rattle through it.
The next one is, and this is something that I really want to hammer home to all listeners: the Fae do not have to be in lush forested places.
No.
Dungeons and Dragons always puts sprites and pixies and blink dogs and everything else in the fucking forest. They always do. The Feywild is bursting with nature. Yes, but there will also be wastelands that have fae in and around them. There will be desert fae and Arctic fae and lava flows, right? Like there will be like nigh uninhabitable places where the fae are just thriving. And every once in a while you'll hear someone say, "Oh, I'm a fire pixie." Right. When was the last time that anyone decided to get into like ice fairies up in Icewind Dale? Right.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you make a great point. Like, you have yet to come to Iceland, and everybody who listens, I implore you to come here. This is a fantastic country, and come to my tours. Please give me money. Kidding, mostly. But you'll come here and you'll notice that this is not a lush country.
No.
Far from it. Like, our climate is, I'm not gonna say our climate is harsh. It's wild. Our climate is wild, but our land is very rocky.
Yes.
Very flow with lava. There are forests, of course, but they are not lush evergreens.
No. So and yet full of fae, right?
Exactly.
The next thing that I want to kind of point out is the idea that kind of the older generations will have stronger customs than the younger generations will. And so when you're playing D&D and you stop by a homestead, out in the far end of the rural area, right? Like beyond the actual farmlands, there's still a farm, and the people out there are really friendly and whatnot. You can stop there and get a meal and you go in, and it's fine. But the old grandfather type that's there, like late at night, gets up and hangs bells from the windows for whatever reason, right? Like, and the younger ones roll their eyes, but you can't stop grandpa from doing that. And then when he doesn't do it, shit hits the fan, right?
Yeah.
And we have that in some like modern horror movies and stuff too, where it's like the elderly person knows and the young people think they're crazy. That's a pretty common trope. I don't see that super often in D&D, but I think that it should be. And I think the reason that we don't see it super often is because we don't get a lot of fucking fae, right?
Yeah.
So,
isn't like that like old person trope, isn't that, now correct me if I'm wrong, that is very prominent in the Spiderwick Chronicles?
that is outside of my wheelhouse.
But from what I remember, there was an old woman or old man who was like, "Don't do this," but then the young kids were like, shut up," and then it all went tits up.
Yeah,
old person died.
I also think of like, for some reason it ties me to the shoemaker leaving milk out for elves, like that old story. And the elves would come and make shoes, but
is that
in my head, like, he's not necessarily elderly, he's not old, but being a shoemaker that leaves milk out for elves on the back step when you come into your shop in the morning, you're picturing cobblestone, you're picturing old timey, right? And so like older generations that are engaging with this. So so
that is Brothers Grimm. I did not know the story. I thought you were referring to an Icelandic story for a second.
No. Oh, I mean, hey, I taught you a thing. Shit.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty neat. I mean, this just proves elves are fucking everywhere. This is a German story.
Yeah.
Like, these are vastly different from my elves, but elves nonetheless. You can take inspiration from most of Europe, but what everybody thinks to immediately is Tolkien's elves, which is fair. It is the most published and most obvious thing when you think about elves.
It's funny because of the weird disconnect that people have in North America between elves, because there's Tolkien elves, and like, if you're a nerd at all, you understand that these elves are the same kind of elves that you get in like science fiction situations as well, like Warhammer and whatnot. Like these are full grown, essentially humans that are a little bit mystical, are long lived, have pointy ears, right, and have more regal,
magnificent and beautiful,
and more civilized structure than even humans and all that stuff, right? So but then you also have the Keebler elves that live in the fucking tree and bake cookies, right? And those are and like Santa's elves, there's a weird disconnect. Like, we have the two kinds of elves, right? And those elves are gnomes, right? But so anyway, are Snap, Crackle, and Pop elves? I think they are, from Rice Krispies. I think they are.
Possibly. I know what Rice Krispies are. I know who they are, but I never really thought about it.
Hold on. I'm looking it up right now. Rice Krispie. I just want to see if they got pointy ears. Yep, they got pointy ears. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're elves.
Well, if
Anyway.
they must be elves. They got pointy ears. The fantasy says so.
Yeah, and they're not green or gray. Otherwise, they'd be orcs. That's the difference. So, um, so the next thing that I have written down here is that the hidden folk
Mhm.
might be where the isolationist idea for elves in D&D and Tolkien and everything else come from, because they very much are they're not just like removed from culture, but they're like, these are our sacred places, do not fucking come here.
Yeah, but they still mingle when they need to or want to
Yes,
with the
but
outside world.
but it's very different than any of the other like players handbook species, which are like,
Yeah.
yeah, sure, come on in. Well, we've got a warm fire and we'll have a feast because you showed up here. And the elves are like, no, not for us, thank you. Right.
Yeah.
And we get that, in Lord of the Rings, whenever they travel through like an elven city, it is a blessing that you are here. This is a hidden space, and we are allowing you here because it's an extreme time and you are trusted allies that have been like vouched for, right?
Yeah.
Random fucking bumbling farmer is not going to end up in an elven city, right? And so
No.
and so I feel like that might come from where the origins of the hidden folk and whatnot might have been inspiration for Tolkien and therefore D&D.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to point out really quickly, and I think we touched on this a couple of times, but I want to say it out loud and very specifically.
Yeah.
Villagers should not all necessarily believe the same things.
No.
But even if they do, they should believe them to different depths, right?
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah.
here believes that there's a manticore that lives in the woods, but only some people are legitimately scared of them, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, that's you probably got that because I said like there's varying degrees of belief here in Iceland. Like
yes,
we're all aware of the elves.
yeah,
Like, but I'm in that like 80, like maybe like there I've seen stuff that doesn't make sense, so maybe, but it could also just been some bullshit. And then there's probably my brother, who is, I'm not gonna say more modern than me, just more thick-headed. Who he would swear up and down. No, why the fuck would I believe this?
older or younger brother?
Younger.
Well, is he a teenager still?
He's 19.
Well, he doesn't count. Nobody counts until they're 20. He said he said alienating half of the listening.
Yeah, you guys are useless, I say as a 22-year-old. Screw your opinion.
Yeah, as someone myself, as someone who is closer to the irrelevancy of or the irrelevance. Nope. Yep. The words. Oh God, I've got the Andri disease now. I can't figure my fucking words out. As someone who is closer to the irrelevancy of old age than teenager, then I'm going to yell at the teenagers. So anyway, so my next point here is that changelings and doppelgangers seem like they could actually stand in really nicely for a lot of what the elves are doing in Icelandic folklore. However, changelings legitimately have their own culture and stuff. I would say doppelgangers they're probably more likely to be what you want to do if you're going to tell these tales of someone who is like mingling in and among the people, but if you find out their true nature or you call them on it, that's dangerous as shit.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, changeling and doppelganger. These are just two words from two different cultures. That's just simply how it is. Yeah. But in D&D perspective, the hidden folk, or just elves, are definitely more in the doppelganger area because you don't want to call out a doppelganger.
No, and I would suggest that I would prefer that doppelgangers were fae.
Absolutely. I mean, like, it is a shape-shifting thing. What is like the most prevalent thing that a lot of the fae do? They shape-shift or make people shift shapes.
Yeah. So I'd be looking at that, and I might just reskin it and make them a little bit more fae-like and a little bit less weird alien-like that the art gives them. But like doppelgangers are somewhere that I would look when I'm dealing with kind of older fae myths about like infiltrating societies, and not for anything necessarily like malicious, just because they want to, right?
Yeah.
And I want to also get into the idea that polymorphing, like I said before, is like clearly something that Fae should be doing.
Absolutely.
I think it's fun and it's a chaotic thing to do. I might create a spell that is like lesser polymorph or something, where you can change a person into it's just polymorph, but it lasts for like 1 minute, right? Enough to take someone out of combat or just to fuck with someone so you can get a quick escape, right?
Yeah. I mean, the polymorph I talked about in the book is permanent. Like that guy just was a whale for the rest of his time.
Yeah. So,
but that's a little too much, maybe, for D&D purposes.
What's curious to me is that when people get polymorphed or when they get enslaved, and they end up going back to the Fey realms, what happens there? What does their lives look like? What do they do? And I'm sure that you don't have answers because they're Fey and like you don't get they just go there and are enslaved, right?
That is pretty much all I got to. There might be something I missed, definitely, but from just lore that I've grown up with, from the bits and pieces, or well, of course, most of the book that I went through, you never see the people again unless they manage to trick the elves back. Yeah, because you can out trick the elves. It's possible, but
there's no sense of like, oh, and they went back there and waved a palm frond to keep them cool, or we're working in the kitchens or in the mines, right? Like you don't know what the slavery
not that I saw
means, right? And so that's interesting to me, like that you can. In my head, it's very much indentured servitude without a whole lot of free will, right?
Yeah.
So you are waiting on them.
Yeah, hell, I mean, I think it also just depends on the elf you're getting. There is one story that went that an elf managed to trick just a girl who was working at the farm, and the elf tricked her to raise his children forever. That's one example. Another one, which is a little more maybe R-rated. Female elves would, for men who crossed them, would take them as a sex slave, to be as forward about it as possible.
But are these slaves? Do they have free will, or are they like entranced, like voodoo zombies are? Right?
I see. It doesn't specifically say. They just don't have a fucking choice.
Okay. So it's not.
I don't know. I might have to read more into it. Yeah, I might have to read more into it, like whether they are just magically compelled to listen.
Yeah.
Or if they are just mind wiped or whatever. I'd have to read a little more into it and maybe go to other sources than this one book I found.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it makes me think, just like as a total aside here, I would love to have an archfey that does not compel you to do anything. What they do is they just rewrite your fate and your destiny so that your personality changes so that you want to do this, right? It's almost a brainwashing, but by like stealing your future to benefit them. But it's interesting because the instances you give of this slavery are very much like you come and you do this one service for me and only this one service. It's not like we're not dealing with like camps full of slaves or anything like that. It's very much you're going to come live with me and you're not allowed to leave, but your purpose is this one singular thing, right?
Yeah, but for all listeners, that is just what I found. The problem with Icelandic folklore, it wasn't written down until hundreds of years later. So this is all like oral stories that have been passed down and they've been meddled with, like, which is unfortunately very true just with Icelandic history as well. Our Icelandic history is riddled with inaccuracies and fantasy.
Yeah, and I think that so what's interesting here, we're gonna stay with the dark theme for another minute. I've got a couple more notes here, but these are more observations than anything else. I like reverse engineering stories to find out what the inspiration is, so that I can maybe use that inspiration in a different way. And one of the things that you kept hitting on over and over and over, I think, comes from a very, very dark origin, which you've mentioned, but I'm not sure like has been spoken out loud. And so I just want to acknowledge this. There's some pretty dark origins for the founding of Iceland, right? Like Viking raiders kidnapped women and brought them here to start their own society. There are some very, very dark assault and abuse factors there.
Oh, absolutely.
And the reason that I bring that up is not to revel in it or to necessarily put a spotlight on it, but to say when we then look at some of the folklore and the myths and the stories that come out of it, the worst things that can happen are children being kidnapped. So like it's kidnapping, it's slavery. These are the consequences that are so horrifying. And so if you're going to include this into your D&D, right, like, oh, they swapped out a kid, right, you got to keep in mind that there's probably some real world trauma behind this. And to keep it, I would glance off of it to imply the darkness of Fae. I'm not going to explore it, right? Like I'm not going to dig too hard into this. But part of the thing that sold me on it is the idea that if you deal with these unknowable creatures like the Vikings would have been, right, that have their own language, they come from a distant land and they have power over you, and you understand what the danger is, you see it, but you're not allowed to acknowledge it. That to me sounds like an oppressed people that are trying to come to terms with their new lives, like away from home. There's no way out. You're not escaping into the wilderness of Iceland to eke out a life for yourself, right? Like no. So like this is it. What are you gonna do? Steal a boat? What are you gonna? You're not a sailor, right? Like this is it. This is what you have. So there's a certain amount of acknowledging the danger, but you cannot like acknowledge it for yourself, but you cannot put a spotlight on it because that is incredibly dangerous for you. Like these things are hard baked into these stories. And like if you look at the origins of the culture that's writing these stories, every myth has to resonate to some degree. What's resonating, and this is why, right? And it's very dark. So just like something to think about when you're dealing with the darker sides of Fae is try to reverse engineer it and understand if there are themes here that you may not want to explore too hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I probably would have been better of me to acknowledge it better instead of just saying the Vikings took a pit stop. That is just
well, I mean, but honestly, that is kind of how I would deal with it in Dungeons and Dragons, because I don't want to spend 45 minutes dragging my players through that much. That's not what they showed up for, right?
No,
so
absolutely. And what I said is what I say to tourists who come to my tour. I'm not going to go through the dark history of Iceland or the Vikings. The Vikings were like the Vikings that we think of today are romanticized.
Yes.
Very romanticized.
No, these were pirates, like not pirates.
I mean, do you want to know something really technical? I am not a Viking. I'm Nordic. A Viking was an occupation. You would go to Viking.
Cool. I didn't know that.
Like in Icelandic, ég fór í Viking. I went to Viking. That was a Viking is just Nordic pirates.
Yeah, it's raiders, it's marauders, right? Yeah, like it's ravagers.
So I also, just to put this out on the internet, because to anybody who is listening and happens to be of Nordic descent, and if you're calling yourself a Viking, stop. You're Nordic. You're of Nordic descent.
Yeah.
You are not a Viking. I'm from Iceland. I am not a Viking. I am Nordic.
I always kind of narrow my eyes at Viking tattoos that people get, and I'm like, I don't like the modern connotation in North America about what that means. It tends to link to like white supremacy.
I think that is absolutely unfortunate because this is part of my culture.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think like the straight up Viking with the horned helmet and shit tattoos, I'm like, kind of adorable.
Jump off a bridge.
Yeah, exactly. So I got two other little things here. Yes. One is that I love the fact that Icelandic Fae are a matriarchy, because there are more Fae queens than Fae kings in pop culture. That makes a lot of sense. We have fairy godmothers, not fairy godfathers. Like we often have matriarchies hard baked into to the Fae. And as a matter of fact, when you say fairy and pixie and sprite, a lot of people picture a beautiful female with wings that are living like among the flowers and whatnot, right? Like it is very much a female thing at face value. And yet this is an entire society of Fae creatures. Like it's not just going to be the females. And yet we have that because of the matriarchy. The same way that when you say gladiator, you think male. When you say Viking, you think male, right? Because these were male-dominated societies or subcultures, or
But then also just to bring another, when you think Amazonians in Greek, you think females as well.
Exactly, right? So that's really, really cool to see. The last thing that I want to point out is I wonder if there's a common origin. I don't have any insight on this, but that temptation myth that you gave about I keep saying myth. Is that correct?
How so? The story?
Yeah, like are they stories? Are they legends? Are they myths?
See, this is I'm going to explain why this is a tough question for me to answer. In Icelandic, we have one word for fantasy and history. And that one word is saga or saga. You've heard this, a saga.
Yeah.
This is a word you've heard. That is our one word for history and fantasy. And then all other words like myth is goðsögn, like God's tale. Everything in Iceland has a root of truth in it, but is riddled with fantasy.
That's so
cool.
What
the story I told you, there are probably elements of it that are true, but I couldn't tell you what elements because this has been saturated throughout time.
Yeah, that's so fucking cool.
Just really quickly, Icelandic history. If you were to read that shit, you would look at this, be like, if you would not know what Icelandic history was, and you'd read that translated to English, you'd be like, wow, this fantasy book is fucking sick.
Yeah.
But it isn't. This is like, I love my country very dearly. I, however, hate my country with a burning fucking passion as well.
I feel like the hatred for your country is more the hatred for languages.
I love languages. However, with the knowledge I have a burning hate for it as well.
Yeah. When you know it so well that you have contempt for it. I'm familiar with this. That's how I feel about Dungeons and Dragons. I love it. And fuck, there are some parts of it that just drive me up the wall.
Yeah.
But anyway, the temptation story that you told, that is like, I wonder if it shares an origin story with other creatures, like other mythological creatures, for lack of a better term, that are based on riches and gold and whatnot. Like, and I don't just mean our traditional dwarves and gnomes from D&D, but I mean like the leprechauns or Rumpelstiltskin, spin this straw into gold. Like,
yeah, I mean,
I wonder where that came from, that all of these Fae-ish creatures can really like is there a point of origin where like, oh yeah, they're all about the money, right?
I mean,
where that came from.
I couldn't tell you where specifically the money came from, but absolutely. I mean, this is all of Icelandic elves come from like Ireland, like I told you before. So the leprechaun is definitely probably an inspiration, but we don't have that specifically here.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I wonder if they've got the same like Celtic origins if you go back 1700 years, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's interesting to me, and I bet that comes from people telling stories and these superstitions, these legends, these myths, whatever you want to call it. And when they're telling these stories, they're fucking destitute. They're broke ass peasants, or they're kidnapped victims, or they are. And so like the idea of being tempted by great wealth is a real fucking temptation, right? Because it doesn't just represent, hey, I can be rich, but it represents, I can get out of this shitty situation and become a noble, right? Like, when you start to unpack the reasons why, I look at this for urban legends too, right? Like the famous one is the phone call coming from inside the house and the babysitter's all freaked out because someone upstairs with the kids, right?
Yeah.
that's a story. It's an urban legend to teach young women to mind their children better, right? And to not trust strangers around their children. Like there's a very clear message there, but it resonates with people because it's frightening, and it's about like the idea of responsibility, things going very, very wrong. And I wonder what these older myths and stories, what was resonating with the people when they were telling them, when these were new stories, right? Where are these origins? We'll never know, but it's interesting to like reverse engineer and try to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's wild. I mean, stories throughout the ages have always been like warnings, like superstitions. Like, I mean, let's take a relatively not modern, but maybe a recent example. Because the Until Dawn movie came out not too long ago. Did you watch it by chance?
No, I didn't.
No, it's okay. The game is better. But you know, they go into the story of the Wendigo, or the Wendigo, however you're supposed to like pronounce it. And that story is like I of course have very little knowledge in native North American like culture. Like I just know this and that, but it is probably the legend of the Wendigo is probably taught to tell people not to venture alone in the forest, or not to, you know, eat each other or whatever. Like like the story here,
don't eat each other doesn't feel like something that I need to tell people, but I feel like maybe it should be brought up once or twice in someone's life.
And then here in Iceland we are told to not go to lava fields because the elves are there, or don't climb on this rock because this is an elven church, or whatever the hell it is. Like these stories are always somehow warnings to children that have then just gone out of hand almost.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because then when a thing actually happens, it makes perfect sense that like the older generations would say, "We tried to warn you," right? This was the thing.
Yeah, right? The smug bastards are going to say, "Yeah, I told you so."
Exactly. And then if you say it enough times, you will come to believe it. That's true of just about anything. So anyway, this is a lot of fun to think about. This is a fun topic to explore. I would love to do a follow-up episode on this sometime in the future. Maybe I will come to the table with different kind of lore around elves and the Fae as well. So so we can trade back and forth a little bit. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this episode up?
Not necessarily final thoughts, but just like to everybody who listens, I encourage you guys to look through cultures of the world. And I know that Scott, he's very hesitant to do that because he doesn't want to appropriate, which is a valid thought process. You don't want to be like appropriating different cultures. However, I've told him this, and I'm going to tell everybody. I absolutely want you guys to look through Icelandic culture or Nordic culture properly. Not the romanticized bullshit. Thor, this is a small rant. Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not my Thor.
No.
My Thor is a fat, tall man with a red beard.
I'm your Thor?
I didn't think you were tall, Adam.
Ouch.
No.
All right. Well, this episode's over, you son of a bitch.
No, but I mean, and that's like, I dig further than just the romanticized bullshit.
Yeah.
And that is probably my like biggest statement. Like, if you're gonna go like to take something out of a culture, look at the origin. Don't look at, you know, Marvel's Thor or Loki and say, yeah, it's good enough. Of course you can use that, but then don't claim it to be true to its own material.
Yeah, you've got to. My problem that people have now, and I actually want to take this back to the Wendigo thing you were talking about a moment ago.
Yep.
I have seen the Wendigo myth, and I've read it, and I've seen it, the story, and and it impacting like different groups of people probably a dozen times, and every one of them gets them very different. And then you can tell which ones are like, you can kind of lump them together to say, oh, these ones are all kind of very much about this kind of story, and this one's about this kind of moral that they're trying to get across, right? And you can say, hey, there's probably 2 or 3 different origins for all of these 12 stories, right? And yet they're all labeled the Wendigo. It's the same thing you're talking about, the the two different versions of Thor, right?
Yeah.
If you are going to the Stargate movie to be inspired about Egyptian gods, you're doing it wrong. However, it's not that you shouldn't be taking things from Stargate. Stargate's fucking rad. But like there are, like, you're absolutely right. Know your origin and know the purpose behind the story, because Marvel's Thor, the purpose behind it was to sell tickets and be cool, right? There's not really a huge morality tale. There's a little bit of a morality tale in there about be humble, don't be a prick, right? That's the first movie. Every movie has a message to tell to some degree, but that's not the true Thor. The true Thor has a very different, more grounded, and more brutal story, right? And
yes, absolutely.
And I love him for it. But I think that that's a great final thought for this, is because, as we said, elves have many different flavors. They're from many different cultures, and there are many different kinds of them in pop culture as well. And we can think about elves being more than just what D&D elves have to offer. They give us a glimpse into the Fae, and there should be things that live in the lava fields in your D&D campaign. There should be Fae that are out in places where you wouldn't traditionally expect them to be, but they're still very much acting like Fae. The Feywild should not just be Rivendell.
Yeah.
But it often is, right? And we should be able to go to the winter portion of the Feywild, right? Or the volcanic section, right? And still find it teeming with Fae. So we should, I love your point. We need to start thinking about our stories and our inspirations, and where they come from should be a part of that thought process before we start using them, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's all for this discussion on Icelandic elves and Fae. We kind of spun out to a bunch of different topics, but
I mean, like I said before, what better way to talk about elves than an absolute clusterfuck?
I want to say thank you for putting this one together. Normally I give you like pages and pages of a breakdown.
Yeah.
We're going to go through this, and this, but I just went in completely fucking blind and had a blast. So,
yeah, I mean, it's not like Robert does when he gives you like a 50-page Excel sheet or whatever the fuck.
He just did that. I've got a recording coming up with him like in a week or so. And I have set aside Monday evening to sit down and read that.
Yeah, like I came with a physical book in a different language with notes in a different language.
And you're not even wearing pants. So
I'm wearing shorts.
Well, hey, I was right. Anyway. For everyone else, thank you for listening to another episode of the It's a Mimic podcast. If you'd like to support us, we have a donate button on our website, itsamimic.com, a store with some It's a Mimic merch, and a Patreon. This episode and others can also be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and most other podcast apps. Thanks again for listening to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're going to get.
In this case, they got a clusterfuck.
No, that they can always rely on.
That's fair.